everyone, and welcome to the 6:30 p.m. through 7 p.m. session of the 2022 Open Simulator Community Conference. In this session, we are pleased to introduce the presentation, Developing Virtual Reality Simulations for Novice Users. Our speaker is Rachel Umoren, and Rachel is an Associate Professor of Pediatrics, Adjunct Associate Professor of Healthcare Simulation Science and Global Health at the University of Washington. Jasmine James is a recent SIU SOM graduate with a background in global health, public health, and currently completing a research year with the Neonatal Education and Simulation-based Training Lab at the University of Washington, prior to continuation of her residency training in obstetrics and gynecology. Please check out the website found at conference.opensimulator.org for speaker bios, details of the sessions, and the full schedule of events. This session is being live streamed and recorded, so if you have questions or comments during the session, you may send tweets to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag #OSCC22. Welcome, everyone. Let's begin the session.
Thank you so much, Claire. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. I'm very excited to be here, as always. Very inspired by all the sessions so far, and a little bit sad that I'm standing between you and dancing, but we will try to get through this so that we can get on with the after party. I'm delighted to be here with Jasmine. Dr. James, as was introduced, and I have been working on a research project to bring virtual reality simulations to novice healthcare users, and we're really happy to present our more recent work and the lessons learned on developing virtual reality simulations for novice users. And I'll turn it over to you, Jasmine.
Okay, and so we have been working on a project to bring virtual reality simulations to novice healthcare users and present some of these lessons learned. And so as we start with looking at goals established by the World Health Organization, child mortality continues to be a major problem, with over 2.4 million babies dying each year. In our previous research, we have found that mobile virtual reality is an acceptable approach for healthcare professionals in low resource settings, and 99% of our survey respondents would like to have access to some form of online simulations.
Thank you, Jasmine. So we have focused on this issue of newborn care training using mobile VR for 5 years now, and developed an initial prototype we call the Electronic Helping Babies Breathe Simulations, or EHBB. That prototype included 3 simulation scenarios that covered a healthy newborn and care for a newborn requiring some intervention at birth, as well as care for newborns requiring resuscitation with bag and mask ventilation. And this project was funded by the Gates Foundation and really enabled us to establish the feasibility, usability, and acceptability of mobile VR for healthcare workers in low resource settings. So the EHBB VR and mobile apps are available for free download on the Google Play Store. And our team subsequently received some funding from the NIH to expand on this work in collaboration with technical partners in low resource settings. So we're very excited to have been working on this aspect of the project, the virtual essential newborn care simulations this year. And we've designed 12 new scenarios that cover both resuscitation and early newborn care for both term and premature newborns. So the scenarios feature newborns that require some intervention at birth, all the way through resuscitation with bag and mask ventilation, and then care for that newborn afterwards, which was a piece that was missing from our previous study. So in addition, the virtual essential newborn care simulations are designed based on the most recent WHO essential newborn care curricula that were just released. And we have new interactions and dialogue features. Now, today, however, we're going to really talk about the usability testing with healthcare workers, which in our current work had even less exposure to technology and VR. And that has posed a really exciting challenge. So usability tests recruit end users to provide feedback during development. And I know a lot of us are educators or have interest in education. And one of the key questions that keeps coming up is how can we more easily and quickly orient learners to the lessons that we're teaching them so that they can get going quickly. And so we recruited end users with a broad range of age and experience, both with clinical care as well as with technology and with VR. And we asked them to use the prototype application and measure their experience through surveys and direct observations. So we're going to highlight some of these surveys and direct observation approaches that we use. So in the first impressions test, the user views the simulation for 5 seconds and then answers the question on their first impressions. And interestingly enough, even very basic graphics and simulations that don't necessarily, I think for us, carry a lot of weight, are viewed as very appealing and very interesting. Even our basic mechanics test is not viewed as low quality. So that was kind of encouraging. And then as we move on to more concrete testing with the first click test, the observer asks or notes what the participant did first to accomplish a task, and why they took that action, and what they would expect to happen as a result. So if the first click was unsuccessful, then they're asked what they would do next and why. And so we collect data over time on that first time user performance. We certainly have users come back for second and third times, especially as we do further iterations. But that first time user performance is key because that's what your learner who's never been exposed to your activity is going to experience on their first time. And that's what's going to impact whether they continue to use that educational activity or whether they give up. So this is an example of a basic mechanics test. We had a first click test tracking task completion on first attempt by first time users. And you can see we started out pretty low, about 60%. It got worse and then it got better. Then it kind of flattened out. And so we were wondering, why is this not continuing to track up? And so we delved into this in more detail. And looking at the more detailed data, we were better able to understand where the challenges were and to make adjustments. So on this graph, you can see that on the x-axis, the different task types that we had them use, and over time, you can see kind of improvements in performance. Generally speaking, we're tracking upwards, with the exception of the ventilation task. And they had a lot of difficulty in the strategies that we were using to show how to provide bag and mask ventilation. So we had to do a complete rethink of that design approach. So other important notes from usability tests include how much difficulty did the user have in knowing what to do? How much difficulty did they have in knowing how to perform the task? Because they may not know what to do, and especially with experienced users, that is often not the problem. Like they know how to perform bag and mask ventilation, or they know how to take a temperature on a baby, or they know that it should be done, but they don't know how to do it in the virtual environment. And so, determining whether that's the disconnect, or whether they know how to do it, but then they don't know how to, they have difficulty in performing it. We use gaze tracking. So, focusing the gaze on a specific area could be a challenge for some. And so looking at these different elements and breaking them down is really important in improving the design and improving the experience for the users. So other lessons that we learned on design were that novices may not respond to the same types of game interactions as experienced gamers. And so it's really important to design as much as possible to make orientation unnecessary, to discover and adapt to the learner's needs. And that's through the process of extensive usability testing. And then knowing when to give up on an interaction that's not working for your learners. Very hard choice sometimes, but very important. Other lessons that we learned specifically on the user interface were simplify wherever possible, provide really concrete directions. Don't assume that they know exactly what you want them to do unless you've specified that. Provide readily accessible hints, avoid over-reliance on text. This was specific to our user group, for which sometimes English was not the primary language. And so we had some pictures that we included in the hints as well as basic text. And then finally, some lessons learned on access. Well, designing for devices and platforms that are readily available is super important so that your users will have access to whatever you're trying to present to them. We tried to limit the file size for easier download. We recognize that learners may not have reliable internet access, and so thinking about ways to, whether you're using a virtual environment or some other software, make it so that it can stand alone and not be wholly reliant on the internet. And then monitoring for changes in platform and device compatibility. There's been a lot of discussion during the sessions about changes and evolutions in virtual environments and other platforms, and so keeping track of those. But overall, despite the challenges, there remain many opportunities globally for XR educational curricula, and I think we were all inspired by the last session with Mary Magdalena and her work in Indonesia. And I know that there was some mention of Japan, and I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity beyond the US and Europe to use virtual spaces because XR awareness is increasing globally. They're low-cost phones that are more VR capable. And again, we've used phones as our basic platform just because electricity is sometimes a challenge, and so having a device that can run on battery for a while and is easily accessible because a lot of people have one became very important to us. And internet is more accessible at less costs now than it ever has been, as well as institutional and tech partnerships that are more common. So overall, I'm very optimistic. I continue to be every year. Maybe that's why Lear has me round out the OSCC every year. It feels like I'm always the last session, but I'm always very optimistic about the future of virtual worlds and virtual simulations because I can see that we're in this for the long haul. And so I will, with that, turn it over to any questions.
Hey, well, thank you, Jasmine and Rachel, for such a great session. We have some questions. Let's see, one of the first ones is, did you design your own survey questionnaire or did you use a previously tested instrument?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, so the first click is a previously tested instrument. It's validated for usability testing, as is the 5-second questionnaire. But we did have some additional questions that were specific to the tasks that we had them provide to do. I think we ultimately had close to 20 tasks. And then, with each of those tasks, we employed the first click questionnaire, but also these additional questions that I shared about how much difficulty the user have in knowing what to do, how to perform the task, and then performing the task. And we found that to the responses to those questions to be quite illuminating.
Thank you.
I will say there are many more usability surveys. And we didn't put them all in due to time constraints, but there's the system usability scale, there's a NASA TLX. And so they're depending on your tool and what you're trying to measure, there are a number of validated tests out there that you can use.
Absolutely. I've used the QUAS out of the University of Maryland a few times. I don't know if you know this, I teach human-computer interaction and usability testing. So I love it. Yeah. And then Stranger asks, let's see, how much of your design was 100% in-world? In other words, was your design 100% in-world? And or how much of it did you have to do with like video over YouTube or any pre-recorded stuff?
I would say, so I may need to further understand that question to answer it properly, but I'll give a stab at it. So when we first started working in the space of neonatal care and resuscitation, we actually did do quite a bit of our initial prototyping in OpenSim. Then we recognized that for the end users that we were targeting, which were healthcare workers in low resource settings, their limited access to the internet and to laptops and things that would run OpenSim made us shift over to Unity as a platform. But design itself occurs, at least for us, in the form of storyboarding and sometimes even pen and paper. A lot of it occurs outside of the development environment and then proceeds into it for the initial usability testing. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Pre-recorded things, but
right.
We do have them actually use the software and interact within the environment to do the usability testing.
See, that's the difference between low fidelity prototypes and early testing for a formative design where you design a little bit of it, your storyboards, etc., something you can test on, but you don't have a lot of time in the development invested yet before you nail down some of your early decisions through testing. So that's a well-established approach. It's the later prototypes that you'll see actually in world and fully developed, and then you're testing, to see if users are able to perform tasks and if we're supporting their behavior, right?
Correct. Absolutely. Spot on.
Yeah, I've lived this stuff since 1994. And then let's see, Kroll Kitty adds, what is your remote patient monitoring strategy and what critical modalities does that include for children?
Oh, that's interesting. I would have to switch hats to answer that question. So my other hat is that I work in telemedicine, and so remote patient monitoring is part of, to a degree, part of what we do when we think about remote care. I'll say that as far as what we have done with remote patient monitoring, it's pretty limited when it comes to newborns. We do work with older children, and I think adults have a lot more remote patient monitoring options, but there are pulse oximeters that can connect to mobile devices and share data that we've done some testing with. I don't know if that answers your question, but another approach to remote monitoring that is kind of remote monitoring, but not as fancy, is where the family enters data about the patient's weight or patient's glucose or how much they fed, in our case, the newborn, and puts that into an app that later someone on the hospital end can monitor and see if everything looks okay. So
that's great. We have one last question.
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's one last question I do want to answer. Actually, maybe I'll let Jasmine answer this question about chatbots.
For the recording, let's go ahead and put it in there. Josh Garrett asks, are you currently using any NPCs or bots or an AI chat for patient interaction?
Jasmine, do you want to take that one? Maybe share a little bit about Vanessa?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you mentioned bot. We are currently working on, it's a separate project, but it uses a simulation patient, Vanessa, who is a chatbot. And this program is designed for our resident learners to practice their patient interaction and empathy skills training. So it's a simulated environment where you have the your avatar is interacting with the patient Vanessa and trying to relay various medical information with the patient, but improve upon having a caring and empathetic interaction and conversation with the patient. And so that model is hopefully then used as practice to then carry out in our one-on-one real-time patient care.
Well, that's great. And I want to thank both of you for a fantastic session. Let's see, I'm trying to find the final, my windows keep closing. As a reminder to our audience, you will want to check the conference.simulator.org to see what's coming on the conference schedule, which would be a party in the OSCC music stage. But first, before you go dancing, we will have a photo and thank everyone who's attended. We're going to open up the Keynote 1 region, so you will be able to join us here. So hang in for just a moment. And next at 7 p.m., join us to dance and celebrate a great conference with our friends at Wildwood Bayou on the OSCC music stage. And that's a region here in the OSCC grid. Also, we encourage you to visit the OSCC22 Poster Expo in the OSCC Expo 3 region to find accompanying information on presentations and to explore the hypergrid resources in OSCC Expo 2 region, along with the sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions. Thank you again, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our conference co-host and mastermind from Avicon, Rhiannon Chatnoir, better known as Joyce Betancourt.